Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Ranger Will from Copper Breaks State Park. We are an international dark sky park. We started doing these Facebook Live stargazing programs called Under the Texas Night Sky because if we can't be together in a large group looking at the sky, we figured we could do the next best thing, which is be together on the computer, together but apart, and we can look at the sky in this way. We have a cool little program called Stellarium, which just allows us to be able to see the stars. Now, as we're looking at it, I believe you should be able to see my mouse, and that will help us trace stuff out. So, this program is called Under the Texas Night Sky. What we've been doing for the last few weeks is we've been showing you things in the sky that you can see in the summer. But we've been looking at more physical objects. What can you actually see out there? This week is going to be a little different than the past couple weeks because I want to look at it from more of a culture perspective, because a dark night sky is actually a storybook to the human past. It's to our culture. And the way that I mean that is actually, it's like a treasure map. You're looking around and you see all these little dots. And all these little dots are just up there at random, but we, with our big human brains, we take these dots and we draw lines between them and we create pictures. And with those pictures, we create stories. These stories can tell us myths and legends and adventures. They can explain the world around us. And the cool thing is that we have been doing this for a very, very long time, thousands of years. Every culture has some sort of star story. And so my goal is not to just tell the stories, the Greco-Roman myths. I also want to tell some other cultures. So what I like to do is I like to tell a few Native American star stories in there as well. But I got a few stories, and I want to keep this about 30 minutes long, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because some of these stories take a hot minute to tell, and I don't want to keep everybody here all night, which is entirely possible with a storytelling program like this. So we're going to get started. Now, this program that I'm using right now is Stellarium or Stellarium, depending on how you pronounce it. I am from Texas, so I tend to stick with the hard A, so Stellarium for me. I don't actually know what it's pronounced, and that's a disclaimer for the stories as well. I suck at pronouncing things, so names I might get wrong. Now, the cool thing about this program is it allows us to see what's out there without actually being out there. This is what the sky would look like at 11:05. Now, it's not that dark yet, but we can speed up time a little bit in this one so we can get the really, really dark sky and we can see all these constellations pretty well. Now, another thing this program allows me to do is I can actually cheat, and I can pull up the lines, I can pull up the names, and I can pull up the art, but I don't want to do that because for me, that's a little cheating, that's cheesy. So what I want to do is I actually kind of want to trace it out and see if y'all can see the constellations without having to do the lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it out with my cursor. Then I will pull up the lines and I'll pull up the name. So the first thing we're going to look at is one of the bigger constellations in the summer night sky. It's going to be Scorpius. So I'm already over here. You can see Antares, the big red giant, which is the eye of the scorpion. So if we come down here, we've got the tail, and it swoops around, comes up to the eye, and then we've got a pincher. Just like that. That is Scorpius. And if we show our lines, it helps us see it just a little bit better. Now Scorpius, the legend for Scorpius ties in pretty closely, almost, as they're in part of the same story, with a constellation that is more prevalent in the winter that you might know of, and that would be Orion. So the secret is, if you look at Orion, or if you look at the sky in the summer, whenever the sun sets and it starts to get dark, you'll see Scorpius in the south. But if you're really, really dedicated and you wait until super early in the morning or super late at night, I guess depending on how late you want to stay up or early you want to wake up, Orion will actually come up in the east before the sun rises. You don't have a very long time, but he's right there. So you've got Orion's belt, 2 shoulders, a foot, and over here you've got the bow, which, if you want to bring the lines up, helps you see it a little bit more. So that is Orion. Now, we're going to go back to what we'll actually see in the night sky. And then we're going to talk about the myth a little bit. So, Orion is the hunter, right? So in legend, Orion is a hunter. Scorpius is a scorpion. Now, Orion was a very, very good hunter. He was a very talented hunter. And he would boast to the goddess of the hunt, Artemis, that there was no animal that he couldn't kill. He would kill all of the animals, and that was his goal. He wanted to kill every single animal. Now, as he was saying this, the goddess of Earth, Gaia, heard this, and as the goddess of Earth, she wanted to protect the animals. So, she pleaded with the scorpion, Scorpius, to hunt down and kill Orion. And that's what the scorpion did. He hunted him down, and a great battle ensued. Now, this was a very entertaining battle. It was a very good battle. Eventually, Scorpius won and killed Orion. But it was so entertaining that Zeus decided to award Scorpius by placing him into the sky. And so he was placed into the sky. Now, Artemis, being a big fan of Orion, pleaded for Zeus to put him in the sky as well. And so he did. But they were placed on opposite sides of the sky. So in the summer, you would see Scorpius in the south. And in the winter, you would begin to see Orion popping up over here in the east. And usually they're not in the sky at the same time. The reason being that Scorpius is forever chasing Orion around the sky, and Orion is always running away. And that is the story, or the legend, of Scorpius and Orion. There are other versions of a lot of these stories, but for the most part, I'm going to stick to one because I don't want to stick to one constellation for too long. And I'm not going to get to every single constellation in the sky tonight because there's a whole lot of them and there's a whole lot of stories and they take a while to tell. So I'm going to stick to a few. We're going to try to keep it at 30 minutes and we're going to have some fun. So, all right. We talked about Scorpius and we talked about Orion. Now, if we go back over here to the east for another notable summer asterism, it's not actually a constellation, it's an asterism. You see these three bright stars right here, Vega, Deneb, and Altair. These three stars, if you draw a line between them, they make an asterism called the summer triangle. The reason it's called the summer triangle is because it begins to rise in the east in the summer, and it stays there, and it'll go all the way across the sky into the west. Now, like I said before, it's not actually a constellation, it's an asterism. So there are 88 recognized constellations. An asterism is a common shape that we all see in things. So this big triangle right here is a pretty easy thing to draw out. An asterism. If we come back over here to another constellation, Sagittarius, we can draw a little teapot right here. That is also an asterism. The asterism of the teapot of Sagittarius. And if I pull up the little lines, you can actually see that Sagittarius is gigantic, but if you don't know what you're looking at, you're not going to see all these little dim stars, but you will see this teapot right here. And so it's just common shapes that we will see within an actual official constellation. So back to the summer triangle, we got Vega, Deneb, and Altair. Each one of these has a constellation of its own. Vega is in the constellation Lyra, which is the big star right here. Come down a little bit, and you make a little diamond. Vega represents a lyre, which is a stringed instrument. It's a hand harp. So it's a little tiny harp that you just hold in your hand. And if I pull this up, you can see what the lines look like. Now, you've already been over here, so you saw the lines, so it's cheating a little bit. But Deneb is in the constellation Cygnus, which is the swan. So if you know swans, right, they've got really long necks and short bodies and long arms. So we've got the butt of the swan is Deneb. It comes off. You got a really long head and neck right there, and you got wings that spread out across. Over here, you have Altair, which is Achaea, the war eagle. So from Altair up here, this one, you make a giant diamond. So those are the wings of the eagle. And then if you go all the way back over here, you got the body, and the constellation lines don't do the giant diamond, but that's an easy way that I use to find it. So a lot of these aren't, you look at the lines like that, they're not the same on everything when you look at it. The constellation art is where you get the pictures of the thing. So you got an eagle, a swan, and a lyre. So let's look at the swan real quick. Deneb is the brightest star in Cygnus, and the swan is named Cygnus. Now, there are a bunch of Greco-Roman myths about Cygnus. A lot of them, or a couple of them, revolve around Zeus being an all-around not great guy. So I don't like to tell those stories. I prefer a Chinese myth. And in this particular story, just like any of my other stories, this is my retelling of it as I have read it. I don't attempt names usually in a lot of these stories because I suck at pronouncing things. So I usually just stick with a man and a woman, or two lovers, or this particular one is two lovers. So, two lovers, one was a human and the other was a fairy. And they were in love. They were together and they really wanted to get married. But the laws of the land and the laws of the gods would not allow this. Humans and fairies could not be together. But they married in secret. And the goddess found out about this. She was mad because it broke the laws of the land. This could not happen. So what she did was she took the two lovers and she separated them across a great river so that they could no longer be together. But as fate happened, once a year, magpies, a bird, a bunch of magpies would line up together and form a bridge across this river so that the lovers could be together. It's the story of the Magpie Bridge. Now, this kind of story does a thing, is it explains how the stars are laid out. So you see this band of the Milky Way right here running directly down the middle of Cygnus. So in this story, the Milky Way is the river, and the wings of the swan are the Magpie Bridge, with the two farthest away dots representing the two lovers. Now, going back to the brightest star in the Summer Triangle, Vega, and Lyra. Lyra is tied to one of my favorite constellations, which is Delphinus, which is down here. This little one, Delphinus, is very small. One of the smallest constellations. Not the smallest, but it is pretty small. If you need some help seeing that, there it is. Just a diamond with a little tail sticking off the back of it. That is Delphinus. Now the reason that Delphinus and Lyra are close together is because their story relates to each other. So there was a musician named Arion. He played a lyre. He was coming back from a tour of southern Italy, where he had done a bunch of concerts. He was sailing across the sea when all the sailors started conspiring against him to throw him overboard and take his money, because he had earned a lot of money on this trip. I mean, he played so many concerts. And he caught wind of this plot, and before they could throw him overboard, he pleaded with them to allow him to play one more song. He just wanted to play one more song. His magnum opus. He wanted one last shot at glory. And so they agreed, and he took out his lyre, and he began playing the most beautiful song that he had ever played. And as he was playing, a school of dolphins approached the ship. Arion noticed this. He looked overboard, saw the dolphins, and decided to take a leap of faith. He jumped over the edge, and he landed. And one of the dolphins decided to give him a ride back to shore. He rode on the dolphin's back all the way back. He got in contact with the local authorities. The robbers were sentenced. He got his money back. They went to jail. It's a happy story for Arion. But the god of music, Apollo, wanted to show his thanks to Delphinus, the dolphin. And so he placed Delphinus in the sky near the lyre of Arion. So they're there together. And overall, that's a happy story. That's one of the few happy stories that you find in the Greco-Roman tragedies and comedies and myths. They don't usually end very happy. Now, what I want to do right now is I want to get away from the Greek and the Roman myths for a second, and I want to tell a Native American story. And again, these are my renditions as I have read them, as I have learned them. I might mix up some plot points. You might have heard it before. It might be a little bit different, but this is just how I tell it. So, you come over here to the north, You got the Big Dipper over here. That one's pretty easy to see. Once you come over here, you got this little star right here. This star is Polaris. And Polaris is the North Star. So if I super fast forward my night sky here, you can see that it rotates around that dot. The reason that it does this is because Polaris lines up with the axis of rotation of the Earth. It's almost a direct line with it, so whenever we rotate, that star does not appear to move because it lines up with our rotation. Now, the Native Americans had a story that explained this phenomenon. It told them how the world, it explained how the world worked to them. So, a long, long time ago, before there were humans, there were animals. These weren't normal animals. These animals stood upright and they spoke and they acted like humans. They were animal people. And the animal people were in the world. Now, in the land of the bighorn sheep people, there was one bighorn sheep who was the best climber of them all. He had the strongest legs, the toughest hooves. He had climbed every single mountain in his land a dozen times over. And as a result of that, he began to get very bored. Once you've climbed everything and you have no more challenges, you don't have anything else to aspire towards, so you get bored and you get tired and you don't want to do anything. But he didn't let that discourage him, and he went around the land every single day looking for something that he hadn't climbed before, looking for some mountain. Maybe he missed something. And he did this for weeks. He would walk around searching for something. And he had almost given up hope when one day he went outside and he started walking around, and as if by magic, a giant mountain was standing there in a space that he had been 100 times before. Out of nowhere, there's a new mountain. It's a new challenge. He was so excited. And he came up to this mountain and he looked up and he saw that the side of the mountain was almost directly up. He tried to climb it, but it was too steep. Even for his strong legs, he could not get up this mountain. Now, he would circle around the base of this mountain, looking for a way up. But every time he tried, it was too steep. He couldn't make it. Now, this discouraged him because he had climbed every mountain in his land and he hadn't failed once. But he didn't give up, and he kept circling the base of the mountain, looking for some way to get to the top. Now, one day, as he was circling the base of the mountain, he saw a crack behind a boulder that he hadn't noticed before. Whenever he went up to this crack, he saw that there was just enough room for him to squeeze inside, so he squeezed through this crack and he popped out into a cave. Now, this cave had a floor that was slanted upwards, but it wasn't as steep as the side of the mountain, so he could actually climb it. So he did. He began to climb, and he climbed, and he climbed, and he climbed, and as he climbed, his strong legs and hooves knocked out little pebbles, and they began rushing down behind him. He was climbing, and he was climbing, and he was climbing, and more rubble knocked out from under his feet. And then finally, he had climbed for so long that there was no longer any light around him. He was in pitch black darkness, and he was just done. He was tired. He wanted to be back on the ground with the rest of the bighorn sheep people. So he turned around, and he went back down to the mouth of the cave. But when he got there, his heart sank because he noticed that all of the rocks and the rubble that he had kicked out from under his hooves had shot down that route that he had taken and had blocked the entrance of the cave. He was trapped. There was nowhere for him to go but up. So, undeterred, he turned back around and he continued to climb up the cave. Now he climbed and he climbed and he climbed for hours. His legs were pushing as hard as he could. As he kept going, the hours went on and he was getting more tired. He slipped more often when finally he noticed that it almost looked like there was light coming from up above. And this gave him hope. It gave him a second wind, and he pushed on. And as he pushed on, he went up, and he went up, and the light got brighter and brighter and brighter. And then all of a sudden, the light was around him, and he was at the top. And he almost leapt for joy. until he noticed that the area he was standing was only big enough for him to stand. He couldn't turn around and go back down because all the rubble had blocked the mouth of the cave. And he couldn't go down the side of the mountain because it was too steep. That would surely lead to his death. So all that he could do was stand in this one spot, stuck there. Now, the creator saw this because at this point, he was high up enough for the creator to be able to see him fairly well. And the creator looked at him and he took pity on him. He said, "My son, although you will be stuck in this spot forever, you will not die." And so what he did was he turned him into a star. And then he stayed there forever. He doesn't move. This story tells the story of Polaris, the North Star, the star that doesn't move. All right, so the North Star, Polaris, is actually part of another constellation called Little Dipper, which is that one. If you need help seeing that, it's right there. Little Dipper. It's Ursa Minor. Ursa Major is the Big Dipper's constellation. So, let's go just above Ursa Minor here. We've got another pretty cool constellation, and another big one. So this is Draco, the dragon. You've got a head right here. You've got a body that comes down, and then his body actually wraps in between the two bears. And I always get the length wrong, but yeah. So you got a head right there, and the body wraps in between the two bears. Now this software is actually really helpful if you're trying to learn the constellations. You can come in here before you go out at night, and you can kind of trace it out, and you get an idea of what it's supposed to look like. Obviously, it's going to be bigger whenever you go outside and you actually look at it because they're more spaced out, and your field of view is a little bit different than the software here. So our field of view is more like that, but this is a fish eye thing, and we don't have that. But as far as width goes, and it's not going to look this tiny. Everything's going to be spaced out quite a bit more when you actually go out there. But it helps you get the idea of what the shapes are. And that is the big thing if you want to learn the constellations. So Draco here, his story accompanies this guy. So this, you got a square for a body right here. You got a leg, you got another leg, you got two arms. Yeah, there we go. Now I can see it a little bit better. So this is Hercules. Hercules and Draco. Now if you look at the art here, Hercules is depicted as having a foot on the head of Draco. And that's because one of the legends surrounding Hercules involves Draco. If you know the legends of Hercules, you know that Hercules had 12 labors. One of which was to steal a golden apple from the golden apple tree of Hera, which was Zeus's wife. So at their wedding, as a gift to her, she was gifted a golden apple tree. In order to protect this golden apple tree, the dragon Ladon was placed there to protect it. And if we look at the art here, this is a pretty big, scary looking dragon. So nobody's going to want to mess with the dragon. So for a long time, the golden apples were safe. But one of the labors of Hercules was to steal one of these apples. And so what he did was he shot the dragon with a poison arrow. And this killed the dragon, and he was able to steal one of the golden apples. Now, Hera really, really liked this dragon, and she was saddened by his death, and so she pleaded with Zeus, and he placed the dragon into the sky. Now, as a result of his heroic efforts and all of his labors, Hercules was also placed into the sky, but he was placed in such a way that his head, or his leg and his foot was always resting on the head of the dragon. So he was squashing the dragon down because he killed the dragon. And that's pretty interesting because a lot of these constellations actually go together in the stories, at least as far as the myths go, the Greco-Roman myths. A lot of the constellations are in the same stories. And this one in particular is going to prove that very well. So I'm going to give it in my time machine here. And I'm going to hop forward to about 1 in the morning when all of these players are in the sky. So, there's a few here we got to unpack. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the cheater. You saw it over here. You got the W of Cassiopeia. Come up here. I'll go ahead and turn it back on so it doesn't take as long. Square and a triangle. That is Cephas. This is depicted as a crown. Cassiopeia is depicted as a lady sitting in a chair holding a mirror looking at herself. You've got Perseus right here. Perseus is a hero of the story. You've got Andromeda and Pegasus, which look like they're connected, but they're really not. The head of Andromeda is right here. She comes down. This is her knee. And if you look at the art, that shows it a little better. So he comes down about here and goes out like that. Let's get rid of the art for a second. If you look at this one right here, this is another asterism we call the Great Square. It's the Great Square of Pegasus. It's the body of Pegasus. And then you've got his legs coming off. And then there's one more involved in this story, and that is Cetus right here. It's a big one. Cetus is depicted as a giant whale, giant sea monster. In the story that I'm about to tell you, sometimes Cetus is depicted as a kraken, which is another sea monster, but it's a little bit scarier looking than a whale. So I usually like to think of the monster as a kraken because I think it's a lot cooler. So Cassiopeia is the queen and Cephas is the king of Ethiopia. And Cassiopeia, let's look at her art right here. She is a very, very beautiful lady. And she knows that she's a very beautiful lady. In fact, her favorite hobby is actually staring at herself in a mirror like that. And she boasted that she was the most beautiful lady in all of the land. And she had no doubt about it. Now, this angered Neptune's wife, who was also a very beautiful lady. Neptune was the god of the sea. Since it was his wife, he obviously had to do what she said, so she wanted to get rid of Cassiopeia. And it's like, no, I can't have this. She's boasting about stuff that she didn't work for. She was blessed by us, the gods, with her beauty, and she's over here claiming that she's the best. So what they did is they sent the monster Cetus to ravage the coastline of Ethiopia. And so this whale is just destroying ships along the coastline of Ethiopia. It's ruining trade. They can't get ships in and out. It's all around not a great time. If you're running a country, you can't have your food supply and all your trade be knocked off course by a giant whale, so they needed to do something about it. So they went to the oracle, and they asked the oracle, well, what can we do to please the gods? We want to remedy this situation. We want them to stop attacking our coastline. So the oracle thought about it for a minute, and they said, you know, human sacrifice is always a great idea. So, being the great people that they are, they tied their daughter Andromeda to the edge of the cliff as a sacrifice to the sea monster Cetus. Now, as the monster began approaching the coastline to kill Andromeda, Perseus, our hero of the story, happened to be flying by on his winged horse Pegasus. Now, if you know anything about the other legends surrounding our hero Perseus, Perseus is the one who chopped the head off of Medusa. And it just so happens that he is coming back from that very mission. And he has the head of Medusa in a sack. Now, he happens to see this beautiful girl tied to a ledge awaiting death by whale when he sees her, and he is immediately struck with her beauty, and he falls in love, and he decides he has to save her. So he sweeps down, he whips out the head of Medusa, points it at the whale, turns away, and the whale turns to stone. Now, the problem is that the king and the queen also didn't look away, so they also turned to stone. And that one actually has a happy ending, because Perseus and Andromeda get married, and their love is so appreciated in the heavens that they are placed in the sky together. And the rest of the players in the story were also placed in the sky, and they were also all placed in the sky in the same area because they're all part of the same story. Now, one thing that is in a story that is really cool whenever you're talking about Andromeda, so the constellation's right here, right? Just off the edge right here, you can see a little smudge. That little smudge is the Andromeda Galaxy. It is the closest galaxy to us, and it is actually the only one that you can see with your naked eye. And you can see it with your naked eye, you just gotta know what you're looking at. So when we're looking at it, this simulation here is with a very dark night sky. This is actually a 2 on the Bortle scale, which goes from 1 to 9, 1 being the absolute best night sky, and 9 being the middle of a city. So this is a 2. Here at Copper Break State Park, we were also a 2, which is why I've got it set for a 2 right now. And so if you were out there, there were no atmosphere interference, there was no clouds or anything, it was the middle of the night, and it was really, really dark. You'd be able to see, pretty much like this, a little smudge. As you get closer to it, oh, there we go. You get a little closer, we can zoom in a little bit. The cool thing about this one is it allows us to see the galaxy in all of its glory. So, this is the Andromeda Galaxy. Very, very big galaxy, billions and billions of stars. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't matter what you do out there at night, you're never going to see what we're looking at right now. This is super zoomed in. This is like ultra Hubble level of seeing the galaxy. And that might even be too close. But if you want to see what it might actually look like whenever you're out there at night, if you have a really good telescope, I think this one said this image was taken with a 12-inch telescope, which is the aperture, so the circle of the lens is going to be about like that for a 12-inch telescope. If you're in an area with bad light pollution and a 12-inch telescope, Andromeda is going to kind of look like that. You can see it a little bit better. It's not just that little tiny fuzzy dot. It's pretty good. If you're in, let's say, the suburbs going towards the country a little bit, you're not in the middle of nowhere, but you're right next to Grandpa's farm, which is right next to the town that's 5 miles away. It's gonna look about like that through a 12-inch telescope. That's zoomed in pretty good. And then if you're in a dark sky area, again with a large telescope, it'll look like that. Now this also shows how light pollution affects what we see in the night sky. And again, that's with a really big telescope. You're talking, if you want to see something like that, you're going to have to spend at least $1,000 on your telescope. If you're looking at it, you can actually see it with just like a spot and scope or binoculars, but it's not going to look anything like that. What it'll actually look like, whenever I'm looking through a telescope or a spot and scope, whenever I'm talking about Andromeda, the galaxy, I like to describe it as a fuzzy egg, because that's about the size it is whenever you're looking through binoculars, just a small pair of binoculars. So I'm going to turn that back off right there. I'm going to go back into Solarium here. See if I can't click off of everything. Get that to go away. Does not appear like it wants. There we go. And I've got one more story for y'all. So this is one of my favorite stories. It's another Native American star story. And it doesn't have anything to do with any of the constellations in particular. In fact, it almost has stuff to do with every single one of them. So, just like the last Native American story, right? A long, long time ago, there were no people in the world, but there were animals. But they didn't act like animals. They stood upright and they talked. They had personalities. They were animal people. And at the same time, a long, long time ago, there were no stars in the sky. There was the sun during the day and there was the moon at night. But there were no stars in the sky. And at night, on some nights, the moon gave a lot of light. And so the animal people could see to walk around. They could do things. But on some nights, the moon didn't give a whole lot of light. And on a few nights, the moon appeared to give no light at all. And on those nights, the animal people could not see to move around. And they were scared. They would hurt themselves. They would trip. They would fall. They would sprain ankles. They were all around not having a great time. And so they called out to the Creator. They said, "Creator, can you help us? We can't see at night. And we want to be able to go about our way and do things." And the Creator said, "All right, what I want you to do is I want you to go down to the river and pick up all of the sharp, jagged-edged stones that you can find. Don't pick up any stones that are smooth and round like the sun or the moon. Only pick up the sharp, jagged-edged stones." And so they did. They went down to the river and they picked up all the sharp, jagged-edged stones that they could find. Once they had done this, they went back to the Creator and they brought all the stones and they laid it at his feet. And there were a bunch of them. He looked at all of them, decided that they were good. And so he picked up one of these stones and he placed it into the sky. And as he did this, it began to sparkle and dance. It had turned into a star, and it gave off just a little bit of light. Now, he grabbed more of the stones, and he placed them into the sky in such a way that they formed a picture. Now, this pleased the animal people a lot. They got a kick out of that. That was really cool. And so he saw that they enjoyed this, and he said to the animal people, "All right, on this night and on this night alone, you may go up into the sky and create your picture with the stones. Create your picture in the stars." And as he said this, it became true. They began to lift up into the sky, almost as if they were floating. But he said, "It's only one night and one night alone. When the sun rises in the morning, you will come back down to earth." They were like, "All right, we can do this." And before they went away, they all grabbed some stones. And as they were leaving to go make their picture in the sky, the Creator called out to Coyote. He said, "Coyote, not all of the animals are big enough to carry enough stones to make a good picture. So I want you to take this big sack." And what he had done is he'd taken a big blanket and he'd put all the extra stones into it and wrapped it up. Now, the Coyote kind of mumbled and groaned about it. He didn't really want to, but he was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And so the Coyote grabbed the sack and went up into the sky. Now, as the night was going on pretty good, all of the animal people were going around making their pictures in the stars. The bear made his picture in the sky. All of a sudden I can't find it. The bear was making his picture in the sky. The scorpion over in the south was making his tail big and beautiful. The eagle's wings were large and the swan's neck was long. And they were making very great pictures. But one by one, they started to run out of stones, so they needed to find the Coyote. But while they were making their pictures, the Coyote was walking around. He wasn't making a picture. He was dragging this big heavy sack of stones behind him, and he was groaning. He was complaining. He was saying, "Why do I have to carry this sack? Some animals are too small to make a good picture. That's their own misfortune." So he took a handful of stones and he just chunked them up into the sky, no regard for where they went. And they sparkled into the dance and they became stars. But they weren't placed in any order. They were just chunked up there. And the Coyote went about his night. And he pretty much did that all night long. He would walk around for a little bit, complaining about having to carry the sack, complain about how heavy it was, grab a few stones, throw them up into the sky, and they would turn into stars. And like I mentioned before, the animal people were beginning to run out of stones, so they needed more. So they were calling out to the Coyote. They said, "Coyote, Coyote, where are you?" But they couldn't find him. And starting with the smaller animals, they ran out of stones. And then the larger animals ran out of stones, and then no animals had stones left. And they were all screaming and shouting for the coyote. They were like, "Coyote, coyote, where are you?" They were looking for him, but they couldn't find him. And as hours had passed, they looked and they saw that the sun was beginning to rise. And just like the Creator said, they began to sink back down to Earth. As they landed on Earth, they walked around and they noticed the coyote asleep underneath a tree with an empty sack at his feet. The coyote had gone all night and thrown out all of the stones into the sky. So that is why, when you look up at the night sky, some of the stars appear to form pictures. Now, some of those pictures look pretty good. You know, you can see how someone might think that that was a bear. Maybe a little bear. I can see how that would be a dragon. But there's some that don't look that great. They don't really look like what they're supposed to. And some stars appear to just be thrown out at random with no reason at all. So that story explained a few things about the world. For one, it explained why some constellations appear to be really good. They appear to look like animals. It explained why some of them don't really look like anything at all, and explained why the Milky Way, it looks like what it looks like, because the coyote had just gone out and thrown everything up at random. But that's not actually the end of the story, because from that night on, every coyote looks up into the sky and they see that their picture isn't there. And they think to themselves, "Oh, how foolish. Oh, we could have had the best picture of them all." The coyote looks up into the sky and he howls, thinking about his foolishness. So you can see, looking at all these stars, how these little tiny dots up there start to connect with the lines, and these pictures that we see up there and these stories that we tell connect them together. And it shows us how we have viewed the world in the past. It allows us to connect to these past people who have come up with these stories and have told these legends. And without those stars, we don't have the map for the picture. So that's why we're so proud of our night sky, and we want to conserve it as best we can. Now, I hope y'all enjoyed some of these stories. I do have more stories, but as I'm running on 45 minutes right now, this is where I'm going to call it quits. If y'all want to see, I don't actually have another Under the Night Sky program scheduled for next week, so we're going to take a break. If y'all want another storytelling program, I do have a lot of stories that I could tell. Feel free to drop a comment and let me know what you want. If you have a particular constellation that you want to hear about, let me know, and we will see what we can do. Other than that, thank you for joining me. Have a great night, and come see us out at Copper Break State Park.